Hey everyone, it's Nick with the Whip Shop, and on today's video, I want to show you how I made this fancy nylon Stockwhip handle. Just a couple of things I'd like to mention before we get started on today's build. Number one, I'm very honored and thankful to have had the opportunity to work on some of the whips used in Apple TV's new series, C. My good friend Blake Bruning of the Trinity Whip Company received an order for 22 whips to be used on the new show. And Blake was generous enough to invite me to come down and gave me the opportunity to work on some of those whips alongside him and Steve Townsend. So awesome opportunity, a first for me. Thanks so much, Blake. Another big thank you to our friend Todd Rex in Los Angeles for referring to Blake for the order. Todd's the guy who taught all of the actors who used whips in the show how to crack them. So really cool. If you guys haven't already done so, make sure you check out this new TV series. It's always really exciting to see whips being used in a show or in a movie, especially as a whip maker, so make sure you check it out. The second thing I want to mention to you guys is that the date is set for the 2020 Los Angeles Whip Convention. Saturday, January 4th, the Whip Convention will be held at McCambridge Park in Burbank, California, beginning at 9 a.m. Lots more details in the description of this video. I hope to see all of you there. I believe this will be my 4th or 5th year attending. I lost track. If you're even remotely interested in whip making or whip cracking or whips in general, this is an event that you will want to try your very hardest to make. If you are a beginner whip maker or a whip cracker and you're intimidated, let go of those feelings. Everyone here is welcoming. I was intimidated the first year that I went, but I soon found out that everybody's there to help. It's a fantastic event. So I hope to see you guys there. With those two things being said, I'm glad you guys are here, and I hope you find today's video helpful and inspiring. For this stock whip handle, I'll be using 5/8 inch red oak dowel. Even though the handle will be 16 inches in the end, I'm cutting it to 17 so that it can be cleanly cut after the plaiting is in place. I've marked 2.5 inches on the keeper end of the handle, and it's time to carve this section out. I'm making sure to leave a button on the top for the keeper to push against. For the metal sleeve, I'll be using this brass tubing. You can use any metal you like, but the key is to find some with an inner diameter between 15 and 16 millimeters. I'd like the sleeve on this whip to be 2.5 inches, so I'm marking it and cutting it with the hacksaw. The cutting process tears up the ends pretty badly, so I'm going to use this reamer to smooth out the interior portion and bring it back down to its true 16 millimeter inner diameter. To knock down the remaining sharp edges, I'll be heading over to the sanding wheel. The handle is a touch too big, so we'll need to take it down a few thousandths of an inch. To do this, I'll drill a screw into the end, which will allow me to turn the whole handle in the drill. I've lopped off the head of the screw so it fits in the drill chuck. It might wobble a little at first, but it can easily be straightened or steadied by holding it firmly. To slim down the handle, I'll be using 120 grit sandpaper. Remember to check the fit frequently. A little sanding goes a very long way when it's this close to begin with. Still just a little tight. One more round should do it. Now I'll be climbing the ladder of increasing sandpaper fineness to get a smooth finish on the handle. Next, let's polish the sleeve up. I've taken a scrap piece of dowel and I'm carving a taper into it. This will serve as a little plug so we can spin the sleeve on the drill just like the handle. Although I used 120 grit sandpaper in this clip, 200 is a much better choice, especially if you're using a soft metal like brass. Once again, I'm using finer grits as I go, until finally I'm calling it good and hitting it with a little steel wool for a glossy polish. I think a little stain is in order. Since the stain will only be visible in small places, I don't need to do the whole thing. Just a little dab on top of the button since this part can sometimes be seen. We'll continue as soon as the stain is dry. Well, we have our handle all ready to go, and the next step is going to be plaiting. I'm happy with the way that this brass sleeve came out, and our stain is dried. This part here is going to be covered in plaiting, so there's no need to have stain where you won't be able to see it. On this handle, we're only going to have about 3.5 inches where you can actually see the bare wood. I've put together a design in face plait, and I'm getting ready to cut my strands and begin the plaiting on the handle. In the end, I am choosing to have my sleeve about right here. So that means I'm going to begin plaiting about right at the 1 inch mark above the bottom of the sleeve. That way, in the end, all of the ugly knots will be cut off and we'll have a nice, fresh, flush surface so that we can create a knot foundation and tie our knot over. So make sure that when you're planning your fancy pattern, if you're going to be doing a fancy pattern, make sure that you're taking into account where the pattern will be on the handle. I'm going to cut these strands, red and black, and we will plait our pattern onto our handle. Before we start plaiting, we want to make sure that we are wrapping the surface of the dowel rod where the plaiting will be. We want to make sure that we wrap it with some hockey tape, and that way the nylon strands will have a firm surface so they're not slipping around. For this overlay, we need all of the strands split down the middle. There should be enough length on the strands so that when positioned at the starting point, they are at least twice the length of the remaining handle to be plaited. Red will be on the left and black will be on the right. If you like this pattern, you can find a link to it in the description. As I near the last inch of plaiting, I'm only worried about securing the strands evenly, not the looks, since the last inch will be cut off momentarily. I'm temporarily securing the strands with tape. Then cutting off the excess. This will become the new end of our handle. I'm now binding the area that will lie underneath the future knot foundation. Next, some more hockey tape so we avoid sinew unraveling while we cut. At this point, we'll cut cleanly through, all the way around and down to the wood. After a brief melting, the end is cut off. The same steps are taken on the top portion of the plaited handle. Now we'll give the handle a roll. The fit feels good. I'll be using JB Weld 30-minute epoxy to secure the sleeve. Because the fit is so close to begin with, a little goes a very long way. I mixed way more than I needed here. To avoid epoxy flowing over, I'm pushing the sleeve on with a twisting motion. And now we wait for it to cure. Here, I've cut 8 strands to be used for the handle keeper. I've now transferred them over to the vise to be braided in an 8-strand flat braid. Once completed, I'm using this Bic lighter as a gauge for the keeper. I found it to be nearly perfect for this. Now I'm firmly wrapping the binding with artificial sinew by hand first to hold it in place, until I can transfer it over to the vise where I can really start to pull hard. This binding here will be covered up, so I'm not worried about neatness as long as it is flat and holding nice and tight. Now I'm tying off the sinew. With a fresh razor blade, I'm trimming the keeper right where the indentation that I carved stops. I'm taking extra care not to cut the sinew. I'm adding a couple of 1/4-inch staples just for extra support. After sliding the keeper over a hook, I'm ready to wrap the area with some whipmaker's cord. A little melt to hold it in place, and then we begin wrapping. Once at the bottom, I'm dabbing some super glue to hold it. Then melting and pressing the whipmaker's cord once again. This is synthetic leather. At 1mm thick, it's great for knot foundations, along with other whipmaking applications. Out of it, I've cut 3 strips to be used for our knot foundations. A 15mm wide piece here, a 17mm piece here, and another 15mm piece here. When fitted, this 15mm strip should meet end to end. Then securing it with sinew. And finally some hockey tape. The 17mm strip should make 2 revolutions. Then the same 2 following steps are taken. There's the first revolution. and there's the second. For the heel knot foundation, I'm cutting a 23mm wide piece of 3/16 inch neoprene rubber. To encourage a smoother knot, I'm trimming the sharp edges on the neoprene, first with scissors, then with a lighter. It may be necessary to trim the top of the foundation flush, since it can sometimes shift around during the binding process. We're going to use some synthetic leather for our end cap on our heel knot foundation. Melting a little hot glue, and setting it in place. Once cooled, we can trim it into a nice round disc. And now, it's time to tie some knots. Alright guys, we have our knot foundations in place and it's time to tie the knots. We're going to be using a 7x6 2-pass Turk's head knot for all 4 of these foundations. For the heel knot, we're going to be using 550 parachute cord for the first and second pass. For the remaining 3 knots, we're going to be tying the first pass with whipmaker's cord, and the second pass will be tied with 95 parachute cord. After we finish the first pass of the knot, we'll simply be taking our other cord we're going to be using, melting it into place, and finishing off the knot with the second pass. I'm not going to go into great detail with these knots simply because I already have a video in the description that shows you step by step how to tie them. So I figured this would be a really good opportunity to show you guys one of the benefits of having some slack on your knots. If you're doing 2 colored knots, 2 colored Turk's head knots that have 2 passes and the second pass is a different color than the first, it's very important that if you're using this method that I use in this video, it's important that you have at least 1 inch to 2 inches of slack when you start the knot. And the reason for that is that we are finished with the first pass on this 7x6 Turk's head knot, and it's ready for our second pass, which will be done in red. I already have the red laced up on the needle, ready to go, and we are about ready to fuse these 2 colors together. Now, this is a kind of a precise procedure here because we want that joint of the 2 colors to be underneath that single black strand right there. And it's not always easy to get that, especially when you're starting out on some of these knots. It takes a while to just be able to eyeball it, snip it, and melt it, because when you're melting parachute cord, some of that parachute cord will recede, especially depending on how long you hold the lighter on and how much it gets melted. So it's sometimes hard to get it perfect, but you don't have to get it perfect. It's the beauty of having slack. If after you fuse the two colors together, it's not lying directly under that parachute cord right there, under that black strand, we have the ability to go through the whole knot like this, all the way around, and move that point. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I'm just going to line it up so it looks like the middle's about right here. We're going to cut that. Just bought these scissors and they're not doing too good. Not very happy with them. And then I'm going to trim my red here. Sorry about the focus there. That's not very good. There we go. I'm going to trim my red. And now I'm going to melt these two together and fuse them together. So you can see, hopefully you could see that on the camera, but as I melted those, they got shorter. And that's just what happens when you melt parachute cord, unfortunately. But it's not a problem. Don't worry about that. I'm going to show you why we don't have to worry about that. So I'm just trimming this up, more so that it slides nicely underneath that black strand. And there we go. So from a first glance, it looks like it's a little bit too far. That's all right. Let's go ahead and start the second pass of this Turk's Head knot. And if you don't care to see this, you can skip this part. Well, it looks like we did an okay job. But let's say we didn't. Let's say that this was tight. Let's say that that strand was tight, and instead, this is where it was resting. What we would do is we would take this slack here and utilize the slack. We would pinch this first pass like this, and go through that whole knot until we got this part to come here. And that is how you would take care of that problem. So it's very important to have that slack. That's why this slack is important when you tie a two-tone knot, a two-tone Turk's Head knot. And I hope that's useful to you. I know I never really mentioned that in my videos until now, and I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to proceed with the second pass of the 7x6 Turk's Head knot. And this whip will be ever closer to being finished. Follow the leader. I have a video on this, so I'm not going to show it. So I just finished up the heel knot, pretty happy with it. It fit into place quite nicely. Next, I'm going to be working on these three last knots. As you can see here, for these remaining knots, for the first pass, I am going to be using this Whipmaker's cord from the paracord store. There's a link in the description that you can get this stuff. When pulled tight, the width is only 3 millimeters. And I'm about ready to do the second pass with 95 parachute cord. So the same thing we did here where we fused the red onto the black, although these two strands, the red and the black, are 550, this is going to be different because I'm going to be fusing 95 paracord onto this Whipmaker cord. But as long as it's nylon on nylon, it'll stick very well. So here we go. First pass of the 7x6, and I am now fusing 95 parachute cord onto Whipmaker's cord. Same thing, just trimming up the sides. Whoops. And be very delicate when you're melting the edges here because these are two very thin cords. The walls are thinner and it's easy to overdo it. Now we just have to thread our lacing needle onto the end of the 95 parachute cord. And away we go with the second and final pass of this 7x6 two-pass Turk's Head knot. I'll be doing the same thing that I'm doing here to the remaining knot foundations. just dipped this entire whip in the wax with the JB Weld 2-part epoxy that we used. 200 degrees is nowhere near enough to damage the bond, so don't worry, wax the whole whip. If you guys enjoy videos like this, I would greatly appreciate it if you would reach down there and hit that subscribe button. Hopefully I've earned your subscription. If not, that's fine as well. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.